All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the monthly lecture series sponsored by Tuleyome. We call it the Nature and You lecture series. We try to cover some nature topics that are relevant to our area. My name is Bill Grabert, and little introduction on Tuleyome. For those of you that don't know Tuleyome, we are a Yolo County-based nonprofit that encourages people to conserve and enjoy the mountains and the mountains that are local to us. So those are the mountains to the west of Yolo County. It's the intercoastal range, the northern intercoastal range of California. And the thing that's there is the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. So we try to get people to go up there. But we also are based in Woodland. So we're very interested in Yolo County things, and including tonight's topic, which is the Woodland Regional Park. Before we start, I just want to mention for the people that came in at the very end, we're going to try to leave our video off and our sound muted. It'll just help the bandwidth and keep the background noise down. If you have questions, please use the chat. Probably everybody's Zoom experts by now, but if you go to the bottom of your screen, you should see the chat button, and you can type in a message to everyone, or you can type it specifically to me if you want for your questions. And if it's something really relevant to what Lars is talking about, I'll break in. He won't be able to read the chat as he's going, but I'll break in and ask him the question. If it's something that can wait till the end, I'll just wait till the end, and then we'll have a question period at the very end of the talk. So tonight's speaker is Dr. Lars Anderson, and he has been in the nature business, in the environmental business, in the science business for 35 years, working for UC Davis and USDA, and also as a volunteer for the Explore It Science Center in Davis, Jepson Prairie, Davis Climate Change, Davis Natural Resources Commission, and now he's on the board of directors for Tuleyome. So welcome, Lars. You can take it away.
Thank you, Bill. See if I can share my screen here and tell me if it's going to work.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Are you getting the first slide up there?
Yes, there it is.
Perfect. Well, thanks for joining us this evening. I do want to keep this informal, and as Bill said, if you have a question in the chat, he'll interrupt me and let me know. I want to read one little passage just to sort of set the tone a bit. And I'll tell you who wrote this in just a minute. It's short, don't worry. It goes like this: I played around our yard some and talked to the fence post, sung songs and made the weeds sing. Woody Guthrie. So I think it just reminds me that part of why we're here is because most of us have a hankering to get out in nature a lot and to see things as they are. And especially now, a year of this being holed up quite a bit makes it even all more important to be outside. So what I want to do this evening is give you a little background about how the Woodland Regional Park got started, what makes it special, and a few pictures of the things you might see out there. We do hope to open this fall. We've been delayed, of course, by COVID, or by at least a year, if not more. And then if you have a problem, I'm going to do a couple of videos, and hopefully they'll work. If they don't, I'll try something else, but we'll see how they go. So let me see if I can figure out how to get this to go again. So I'm going to give a little brief history, how we got here. I'm going to talk about how the effort that's gone into reshaping what was a landfill, and most of you are probably aware of that. Talk about the opportunities for the public and for anyone to get involved out there, and a little bit of what's ahead of us in the next few years. It really is kind of a grand experiment because we've done lots of changes out there, and some of what's happening out there, we really don't know what's going to happen. So that's part of the excitement of it, I think. Just to orient you a bit, you can see at the bottom there, Woodland Regional Park is off Pole Line or Road 102. You see the Spring Lake Housing Developments is off to the west a little bit. The thing to notice too, just since we've got this up there, you'll see there's Conway Ranch up to the right. and some conservation easements right next to the park, which makes it really interesting because there are conservation easement on the park as well as adjacent to it. So really it's an area that's well protected from much more disturbance in the future, which is a good thing. But we will talk about how we almost got some development in that spot, but fortunately we didn't. You'll hear about that in just a minute. Just to give you a little history, and if you've been to Jepson, you kind of know about this. The soils in the valley here, especially around the park, are derived from runoff and alluvial fan from the nearby mountains, intercoastal range, and the processes that go on when that soil drops into the valley and churns around a bit. And what happens is that it develops a lot of fine particles, clay, and just as at Jepson, if you've been there before, we have a perched clay layer that holds water when it rains pretty well, actually. There is some interesting areas, some interesting areas in the park that have some gravelly focal points, which I'll point out to you. And that means there's probably some other disturbances that went on before that. But there's a lot of land on the park itself that has got clay layer and alkaline soils, which makes it unique also. So this is another way of looking at it. If you look at the little section there that says WRP, that's the park. It shows that this was a grassland area, certainly before the 1900s. And clearly we have grasslands out there, just as we do at Jepson, some of the other locations where we have grasslands and vernal pools. Of course, this park has been disturbed quite a bit over the years, and you'll see why that's happened. So we actually, of course, have a lot of non-native grasses in the grassland. But fortunately, we still have quite a few native plants that are doing all right there. And we certainly want to encourage those as we augment the park resources and the habitats as well. Just to remind you what happens with these soils when you have these perched water tables like this illustrated here. When it rains, basically the water is trapped in that upper layer. And very often that perched water table comes right to the surface, as it does at Alcott Lake, at Jepson, and some of the vernal pools that were very much smaller here at the Woodland Regional Park. But it's the same idea, that layer traps the moisture there quite well. So this is sort of the wet season. And the dry season, of course, sun blasts out of there and we have our north winds and it dries out. The one thing that's going to be different at Woodland Regional Park, as you'll see, is that we've actually have arranged it so we have about half of the wetland area will be a permanent pond. So we'll have a very different kind of habitat and environment than you would see at Jepson or any of the other vernal pool places that strictly dry out in the summer. So there's a cultural context and as well as a geological context. So just it's important to sort of think about that too, because we're on lands that were sort of borrowed. We're all borrowing our lands. We don't really own them in a sense. Over time, they get turned over to other uses. Certainly the native peoples in California had been using this land for well over 10,000 years with their stewardship and their use of plants and their stewardship of animals and habitat. The Winton and Patman tribal communities were very careful about that and trying to maintain and sustain indigenous fauna and flora. This all changed pretty radically, obviously, as you know, in the late 1700s or the 1800s. And I'm just call it taken land, the European incursions, disruption of the cultural land connections and stewardship was pretty severe. And it really didn't stop for quite a while, and in some ways hasn't stopped. But on top of all that, in the 50s, there was a whole push, as you know, if you've been in California long enough, it's all about water. So there are water appropriations rights that were developed in the 50s, which allowed the rivers to be dammed and that water to be exported elsewhere, which also disturbed a lot of these sites that were natural habitat for all kinds of native species, plants and animals. But in 2009, and this is kind of an important date for the park as well, there was a change in the federal approach to the Indian tribal rights and so on, and the tribal names that were assigned by the federal government were removed, and the Winton tribe changed their name to the Yocha Dehe Winton Nation. And the meaning of that is home by the spring water. Now it's kind of like that because the meaning of Tuleyome is deep home place. So there's a connection there as well. But 2009 is an important date for the park even though we'll go back and trace a little bit further than that, but as you'll see, that's a rather important time. So here's a little bit of a timeline going back to the 40s, just to orient all of us to what was happening on the park site. Up until about the late 70s, it was the local city landfill or city dump, basically. It's a kind of a dump, apparently, that was used for almost anything that came out of the urban environment. And a lot of things were burned to get rid of them. We weren't too worried about greenhouse gases back then. But then in the late 70s, the landfill was decommissioned. And when you decommission a landfill like that, very often you scrape soil from the perimeter areas of it and just cover the trash you have, and it basically creates a borrow pit. So the soils that were taken from that borrow pit were used to produce the caps that sealed off the trash and the refuse below that. And so that went on for quite a while in the 80s, and from the 80s until the 2000s or so. That whole area out there, and some of you probably are aware of it because you may have been out there, was used for rodeos, for model airplane fields, model boats, probably some other uses as well. I know there was hunting going on out there off and on. So it had lots of uses after it was decommissioned as a landfill. And close to about 2008 and 9, there were development plans to create a sort of a mixed retail commercial zone for that area. And so if you consider that for a moment, we're pretty lucky that the California Native Plant Society and Tuleyome, and really with the help of Glenn Holstein, who's on our board as well, put a stop to that. And basically it was because they discovered, of course, and documented that the soils are special, the plants are very special out there as well. And Ellen Dean, who ran the herbarium on campus, did a floristic survey in 2009 and showed very clearly that there are lots of vernal pool species that you don't find elsewhere, except at vernal pools. We actually have an invasive, or not an invasive, but a endangered plant, palmate bracted bird's beak, which you'll see in just a little while here. So it's a threatened species. So basically the outcome of that effort was to put a stop to the development. And so we have the park developing as it is now, but otherwise it would have been turned into another shopping area, somewhat reminiscent of the further northern Costco center up there. So that was a good thing. And then between 14 and 15 was the inception of the idea of developing a nature, science, or cultural center. And this really was stemmed from interest in Tuleyome and the Conaway Ranch Preservation Group to increase the value of the Conaway lands for nature and preservation of the habitats for Tricolor Blackbird and other species. So for a while, there was a real good idea, and it was a good idea to consider this, but turned out because of the private land issues and everything else, the Conaway site was not as good as it turned out to be. And following some discussions with the city of Woodland and with the impetus from Jennifer Seeger, who had pulled a lot of these groups together to consider a science center and nature and culture center, the idea was to shift that site to the Woodland Regional Park site. So it's a 160 acre park site. And at that time, of course, it had been out of use for some time since it had been decommissioned. So that really began the initiation of the Woodland Regional Park as we're seeing it today, to that effort. And really, Jennifer was really instrumental in pulling so many different groups together. I think she told me she interviewed over 100 people in this idea, the concept of the Science Center and Nature Center. And I got involved because at the time I was on the board of Explore It. So this really began the process that we're now in the middle of in developing this park. And then if you look at the next period of time, 2015 to 17, that's a period when the conceptual planning for the park took place. We applied for some grants, really crucial grants, actually. And the park plan was approved by the city of Woodland, the city council. We began a Woodland Regional Park leadership group that meets monthly. And then Explore It and the city arrived at an agreement eventually that could lead to the Science Center, Nature Center being on that site itself. So this is really an important phase, the 2015 to 2017 phase. And the next phase, 2018-19, we were successful in all 3 grant applications, which is pretty amazing. So we had a California Parks grant for developing a ADA trail, a kiosk, and interpretive signage. The California Parks also granted us some funds to develop environmental education programs, to train docents, and to start some citizen science programs. And the 3rd grant was actually through the Wildlife Conservation Board, and they provided funds through the California Waterfowl Association to actually reconstruct or reconfigure the wetlands, and you'll see what those results are. In addition, during this time, we had other sources of funds and support coming in from the Rotary Clubs of Davis and Woodland Winters, and you'll hear about that project in just a little bit. We have support from Yolo Audubon and from Yolo Community Foundation as well. So actually, if you combine all of this together, we had probably in the order of about 1.4 or so million dollars that we got through the successful grants and the other donations and contributions from these other groups. So 2018 was a big year for us and very successful. And then of course, the COVID came in and we had to put everything on hold for a little bit, but we still made quite a bit of progress. So since 2019, 2020, and now into 2021, these are the successes we've had so far. We have the wetland configuration is done. The ADA trail was finished late last year. It's completed. The irrigation well was installed. In fact, the pump was just put in there in the last week or so, and now we're waiting for some power. We did the first tree plantings in some of the zones where we had pulled out some willows that were in very poor condition. Most of the site was surrounded by black willows, and you'll see those images in a little bit. Then we started some working groups to develop signage for the interpretive signs for the kiosk that is also finished. Planting plans, long-term plans for the park itself, and grants, because you really have to look for funds continuously. And in addition to that, of course, Explored and Tuleyome had to readjust their educational programs because of the COVID. So we haven't had children out there or any kind of program since the last year or so. So that's going to be put off for about a year and a half. Most likely, we won't start programs for the schools until the fall, at this rate, it looks like. And then we also have community support from the Woodland Community College, and they're helping to support signage and activities that are connected with the kiosk that we've built. So this was the concept that we were working on. And what you're looking in that blue area was the borrow pit, the soil that was taken to put on top. And if you look at these little mounds up here, that's the elevation that's been covered up here. And you'll see that around that yellow marking was the original plan for the ADA trail that would come out this direction. The thing to notice too is that, and you'll see in some of the aerials that I'll show you in a little bit, this entire area, the borrow pit was, even though it wasn't totally even, it was even enough so that there was water in there the whole time during the winter, pretty much. And what we have wanted to create was a permanent pond area on the west side, and a seasonal wetland on this side, wetlands that would actually dry up after the seasonal rains quit. And that provides a little different habitat for birds and for other animals to utilize. Then you'll see down at the bottom is a footprint where the anticipated future Explorer and the Science, Nature, and Culture Center would be. And here's our kiosk, which actually is moved up about in this area, and some ADA parking and so on. So that was the concept we started with. And you'll see we're pretty close to that when we actually got done with this. And you'll notice at the bottom again, this was a grant for the California Wildlife Conservation Board to California Waterfowl Association. And just to remind you, and this is a little bit hard to see, but the most important thing is that all that light purple zone, and this is the entire 160 acre city land, is alkali soil types and special soil. So we really have to stay off of that and not disturb it. The darker purple are the vernal pool areas. And even though they're much smaller than at Jepson, we really do have some really nice spring shows of flowers out there. Not so much the invertebrates, because these are not very deep pools and they don't last very long. But you'll see that's the concept here. And everything in this area is really the cap or the landfill cover back in here. And I should mention also, because it is a landfill, there are restrictions about how close you can do anything to the actual cap. We can't plant trees on top of it. You might notice there's kind of a little dash line that's going along here. The concept of this was to have what we call the Upland Trail that would go on top of the mound. And so you could do cross-country running and so on. No dirt bikes, just walking and running. But we're still waiting to get clearance and see if that's going to be possible to do. Mostly the concern is that the cap stay intact and that it maintains the integrity so that the landfill is actually capped and remained that way. So that's to be determined whether we can do that. And then down at the bottom, you'll see the location of the Science Center and Nature and Culture Center down here. And what I'll point out, you'll see it a little more clearly later. The pump that just went in was put in down here, and it will be delivering water down this sort of meandering stream area into the ponded area to keep the water up year round. So we're hoping that will get started fairly soon. So I'm going to show you some old aerials of the site because I think it's fun to look at the history of the land itself. This is the 1960s, and I got these from Ken Hyatt, the city manager in Woodland. And you really can't make out much what's going on, except this was the landfill area in here. Mostly I wanted to point out is that there was not a lot of disturbance in the area where we're going to see the borrow pit that was dug to cap that landfill. So this was the 1960s or so. And you'll notice you really just nothing but fields over here where Spring Lake is now. But we're going to move really quick up to 2002. And I put these yellow circles in there because I'd like you to kind of look at those spots as we go through the years and see what changes occurred. So right now what you see is, first of all, you see Spring Lake is just some roads laid out, no houses at this time. There is the borrow pit that has water in it. At least it looks like it has water in it at this time. And then the landfill caps over here as well. But notice in these areas up in here, you don't see trees. You see some trees, these willows are lining the edge of that a little bit back in here. And over here, there's this little structure which you'll see in more detail later. And this is the Vernal Pool area. So those are the other areas to focus on as we go through the years here. So that's 2002. This is 2003. Again, just roads at Spring Lake. But notice now there's a runway here. I'm going to back up if I can do it real quick. This is the area where they were starting to put in the runway. And here it is a year later. And that's for the model airplane field and a few more little structures down in here. But notice still no trees out here, no other structures, just the open pit. But something is being built here, and that's going to be the rodeo area. So I'll click it again, and we're going to 2004. So a year later, you can see that runway is really well defined now, where the model airplane folks are doing their flights out there. And here's the structure, the rodeo structure, and you can see it's quite well defined and well developed. I think I'd like you to notice too is over in this Vernal Pool area, you can see these lines in here. So there was still traffic and things happening out in those fields on top of all that Vernal Pool location. And so you begin to think, well, this is 2004, and it wasn't until 2009 until the recognition of the importance of these alkali soils and the vernal pools came into being. And the arrows, I put the arrow here because this is going to be the seasonal wetland when we get to it. But right now you can see it's all pretty much the same level in here. And that's 2005, a year later. It's a little bit fuzzier. These are all satellite images, so some of them are better than others, but you can see it's pretty much the same that's going on there. Here's 2008, a little better defined image, and a little more structure going on here, more buildings out here where the model airplane are. And also in close here, you can't tell that little white dot, there's actually a dock where some of the model boat folks, I think, ran their boats off into the water there. So that's 2008. Again, you're seeing some of the housing beginning to start over here in Spring Lake. 2009, and notice that the runway is still there. Notice there's still tracks down here in this area. And this is the year that that Ellen Dean had done some of the floristic studies, and pretty much the same here. Notice this is probably wintertime, or sorry, not winter, but probably late spring to summer because everything's dried up pretty much. That's a lot of areas of salt soils in there. So now we go to 2019. We're jumping way ahead. There are not a lot of images in between, but I wanted to go right to this. This is a very high quality shot. I shot this, a friend of mine from the airplane. And when you do these kinds of images from about 2,000 feet, you can get pretty good resolution. But now notice we've got trees that have come in and back. And actually at this point, we had taken out some of the trees here because some were in bad shape. We also took out some willows and these bare spots here. that were in bad shape. And here's our seasonal wetland. You can tell the elevation is higher because we've got water at this time in here and no water up in here. And then notice all these structures are gone. All the remnants of the model airplane housing and activities is gone in here. There are these small white dots, and you might want to guess what those are, but those are beehives. City of Woodland has leased this area to beekeepers to maintain their hives there, and they use them, of course, during the spring for pollination. And those are out there. And here's the vernal pool area. You can notice it's a lot more intact, at least it seems to me, compared to the other shots that we've seen. You don't see tracks out here. You don't see things running around. I should mention too, also, up until 2019, they did run some cattle out here occasionally in these areas, but they're off there now. So that's where in 2019. Now, I was going to say that these guys built the whole thing, but they didn't. This was one of our groundbreakings for the wetlands. And I wanted to show this now because you've seen the transformation that occurred in there. And you might recognize some of these folks. This is Robert Eddings, who was actually the fellow with the California waterfowl who actually was managed and helped plan the wetlands development. It was key in getting all that done. This is Rick LaFleur is on the board of Explore It. Here's Ken Hyatt, myself. There's Jennifer Seeger and some other faces you may recognize. The other thing you might notice is nobody's wearing a mask. So this is all pre-COVID. I think this is around 2018 in that range. And we've all got our shovels, but just to convince you that that's not going to do it, I want to show you some examples of what it takes to do this kind of work. So let's see if this is going to work. This is a time-lapse video of some of the construction of the wetland. So I'm going to run it, and then I think Bill's going to tell me if it actually works at your end. So let's see what happens. I'm going to start this up. So Bill, is that working?
Yeah, it's working.
So these guys are moving soil, and I was taking pictures with a time lapse about once every 6 seconds. And these guys were moving soil from the foreground, which is really the southwest end of it, and pushing it up toward what will be the seasonal wetland. So you'll see them come back. I think they took a coffee break there or something, but you can see what they're doing. They're dragging scrapers and moving things around pretty fast. And of course, it's not really that windy. Those trees just move that way when when you're doing time lapse. So I think it's just about done. But so they had the equipment out there for a total of about 3 or 4 weeks, and they came back again later once it dried out again to do some finishing changes on it as well. And so this was the formation of the end of the 88 trail, which is a little round spot, and we've got some really neat ideas about what to do out there. But I just wanted to point out that this is a serious construction area. It's well built, it's built to last. And when you go out there and see it the first time, when you do, you'll notice that the pavement is not like pavement you've seen. It's this really nice sort of brownish color that doesn't quite match the soil, but it's close to it. And it's got a texture that's very similar to decomposed granite, even though it's not. So there's a lot of care that's gone into trying to keep this as natural looking as possible. And by the way, this is this area to the right there where there's water. That's the little lagoon area that you may have seen on those other aerials. And so normally when the pond is full up, that will have water year round in that side too. What we're hoping to do is create kind of a mini slough or a mini lagoon in that area. So one more shot just to show you what it takes to put in the 88 trail. I hope this one works. It's kind of fun. Oops, let me back up. So you can see it takes quite a crew to get the cement poured, smoothed in the forms. And again, this was probably, I think, shot about once every 6 seconds in there.
Looks good.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can see it takes quite a bit of doing. That's just one section. Altogether, they put in about half a mile of the 88 trail altogether. So that gives you an idea. It's more than a few shovels to do it. It's quite a bit of work. And then they did a test bore for the well out there a while back last year, and it's actually been installed, as I mentioned, and so we're waiting for power to get that going. So things are moving along pretty well. So I want to show you the last Google Earth aerial that I've found anyway, the most recent. And I know it's recent because it's showing the 88 trail completed, that strip of line that goes around the perimetry of the wetland. So it's done. And I also want to point out that these 4 areas are where we had volunteers from the Woodland Tree Foundation planting cottonwoods, Tuleyome, valley oaks, and California buckeye. Just as a first planting, we have a whole planting plan we're developing. And there's several other areas that will require some plants, in particular around the lagoons here, and then along the edges of the 88 trail. One thing I should mention too, while we have this up there, is that when the park is open, the caps have to be kept intact, as I mentioned. And until we have any approval for any kind of trails up there, the public has to stay off of these mountains. So we're going to be putting in some signage along these edges, probably planting some California rose in here as a deterrent for movement up in the hill. But until we have any approval for use of the what we call the upland area, those are going to be off limits. And I should also mention that this question has come up before. There won't be any use for dirt bikes out here, any motorized bikes like that, or any dogs, except for service dogs. So it's going to be a park we're hoping to have the enjoyment of the public, but also maintain the habitat for the plants and animals that are there now. So these are the guys from the Woodland Tree Foundation planting on the hill there. They brought their own water and topsoil we brought in for them, and mulch. So we're hoping these trees do well, and we'll just see how it goes. In the foreground, you really can't tell. This will have water up to about here once the pond is filled to where it's supposed to be. So what lives at the park? I want to show you some examples of some of the critters out there. It's fun to look at those, and then we'll be stopping in time for questions, but it's fun to look at these. And these pictures are some of this year and some are the past several years. I've been taking pictures out there for about 3 or 4 years now at different times. I'm going to try to show this one because it's kind of fun. These are stilts, and you really can't miss their classic call. But watch the guy who's making all the noise. If it works, I hope it will. Let's see let me know if it does work, Bill.
It's working.
Yeah. So the one bobbing up and down, making all that noise, only take one bob, is really, I think he's sort of the signal to watch birds. Because the other ones are feeding pretty regularly, but this one is not. And he's just making most of that noise out there. And this was not time lapse. It's a little bit jerky when it's playing back here, but so this guy went on for quite a long time. And eventually I can push it a little bit ahead here just to do that. Eventually it kind of goes off scene. Oh, maybe he won't. Oh, I've done it. Anyway, he actually finally leaves and goes off and stops squawking. But that's kind of fun. So we'll move along here. So there are lots of birds out there. And by the way, we've had a lot of interest from Yellow Audubon, and they've actually helped quite a bit, and have put out some bluebird boxes with help from the kids who've actually built the boxes. But this is just a small example of the birds you can see pretty typically out there. And of course, because some of these are certainly seasonal visitors, at different times of the year, there's going to be others coming in. But there's really quite a large variety of birds out there, and they're really fun to look at. So here are the ibis that come in typically in late summer and the fall. Pretty spectacular birds. And we have our geese out there, and that probably will be a problem to deal with at some point, and right now there are not too many, but they're pretty common out there. And this is pretty interesting. There's a red-tailed hawk that's been nesting there probably the last several years, and this is actually from this month. You can see it up in the nest there, kind of hanging out here. But so I went out there early in the morning a few days ago, and sort of hung out under the willows that were just leafing out, and you'll see some great shots here of those guys. As I walked up, they took off and then came back and landed again. One of them did. And that guy's not too happy with me, but he's really posing nicely there. And you can see the willows are just beginning to leaf out a bit. just ready to take off there. One of my favorite shots. And there he's off. But there's some beautiful birds out there. And this guy's been there. I think this group, this couple probably has been there maybe 3 or 4 years at least. And if you look carefully, there's we have a lot of blackbirds out there. I mentioned the tricolor blackbirds are a special population they're mostly on the Conaway property. We may find them here eventually once we have some of the tules and cattails coming in. But if you look at that tree, this is the sole eucalyptus out there, which we're kind of keeping for a roost. But notice these all birds. The one guy was kind of showy over here, so you know he's a red-winged blackbird. And then the meadowlark on the left, you can hear them out there all the time, and goldfinches are coming in, and you see them. This was a few months ago. So just a nice variety of birds. This is a yellow rump warbler, and so I talked to Allison Ken. She said they call these butterbutts. I did look it up, and it says yellow rumped warbler, but they're pretty interesting little birds. This was again this was I think 2 weeks ago when we were getting ready to do the trees out there. So this is winter, just a scene of the scene last year showing the difference in water. This was last year. We don't have nearly as much water this year compared to this. And it's going to be seasonal a little bit till we get that well in. But once the well is going, this is about where you're going to see the water up in there, just about up the tops of those islands there, perhaps a little further. And this was actually just a few weeks ago. We do have crayfish out there, and you see all kinds of their carapaces dried up. In the past years, we've seen them frequently. So that's not too surprising. And we have jackrabbits all the time. This is kind of fun. Caught this guy chasing. He really wasn't chasing after the geese, but they just happened to be there. But you'll see them out there quite frequently, and their trails are all around there. But this also kind of points out we're sitting right next to this urban area, and yet across the road, across 102, you've got this amazing diversity of habitat that I think is going to be even more interesting as the reconstruction that we did with the wetland settles in and it starts changing a little bit again. And of course, we have some really interesting plants that are only found in these alkali flats and alkali prairies. The spear scale up here, I'll have a couple more shots of the palmate-bracted bird's beak. This is the one I mentioned that is endangered and it's protected there. Some of these you will see at Jepson as well and other places. But because of the soils and because of the water regime there and the perched water layer, that's allowed these plants to come in there. And we're just now seeing a few goldfields coming in now and popcorn flower even now. And I should mention, I believe that Nate's going to be doing a Zoom field trip out there in April at our vernal pools as well. So here's a close-up of the bird's beak. It's really an interesting plant. I wanted to use that one on the left to show you the scale. They're not very large. And the patch you're looking at there now, actually, it was quite large this late summer, about 1,200 square feet spread around there, which is good. But the close-up on the right just shows you that in the middle of really late summer, this plant is able to retain its moisture. You can see how the droplets of dew are on there and they're getting water right from the soil. But the other thing that's interesting, if you look carefully at this one on the right, this grass is salt grass, and palmate-bracted bird's beak is a hemiparasite. So it actually requires the association and connection with a host plant next to it. In this case, it's most often is salt grass, which you'll see, I think, in the next slide. There's the salt grass there. So that's pretty common grass at the park. And we are going to do as much as we can to preserve those areas where it is. It even actually popped up after they had done all the excavating for the 88 trail, and right adjacent to it in the first year after that was done, the saltgrass was emerging right next to that as well. It's pretty encouraging. But it's a neat plant, and the interesting thing about this plant is you'll find it down in the Bay Area. You find it at Jepson. It does really well on these alkaline soils and salty soils. And it's quite common there. So we have some connections to the bay, and you can think about that and why we do, but this is a good indicator of that. And popcorn flower, we have a stalked popcorn flower, which is that inset to the right there. And this shot was taken earlier, but there's a lot of areas out there where we're seeing plenty of popcorn flowers. It's one of the most prevalent plants, as well as the gold fields. and blowwives as well, if you've seen those at Jepson before. So what are the next steps out there? We've come a long ways from the point where we had almost a shopping center and commercial mall sitting out there across from the Spring Lake housing. And so what you're looking at now is looking east toward the Sierra at the top of the cap. And that's one of the reasons we really hope we can get to the point where we have a trail up there. The views up on top are really spectacular. You can see the Sierra, and off to the north, you can see just the top part of the Sutter Buttes. And then you look around and you get a panoramic of Snow Mountain up toward the north and west rather. And so what you're looking at is over this other area, which is the Conservancy as well. So these, even though it's brown now, it's wintertime. In the spring and summer, that's a beautiful green area, and that darker area tends to be a vernal pool as well and retains water for several months until June or so. So when you're on top of this site this way, you really get a different vista of what's going on around you. And you can, I mean, if you turn around the other way that we're looking at, you'd be looking right back onto the wetland area we've been focusing on. We have projects we have to finish up in our grants. That's coming up ahead. As I said before, we've been delayed by about a year, almost a year and a half, actually, because of COVID. And this particular grant provides for what we're calling a project called Go Science, which is a project that's being delivered really by Tuleyome and Explore It to students who will come out there. And the park will be utilized for hands-on science and interpretive sort of nature study. The grant also provided funds for docent training, which we did start last year. And we got through our in-house 4 sessions. Perhaps some of you are listening on, were in that group. And we actually got a few of the docents out here last month, or this month earlier actually. But we had to be restrictive because of COVID. And the problem is we basically lost a whole season that we were hoping to use to continue the docent training on site. So that will be picked up this fall as we're going out of this problematic period, we hope. And the last thing I'll mention, we have some funding in this project for citizen science. And really this park lends itself so well to this because we're starting with a baseline of just the beginnings of habitats and enhancing habitats that are there. And so there's be lots of opportunities to look at changes in the flora and fauna that's out there, the way the plants are going to do well or not well, the ones we plant. So there's lots of room for sort of project-based learning, which is pretty exciting. And that's really an important thing for kids to get into in grade schools especially. And then eventually, once the water is in there for a while, I certainly have intention to start some water quality studying and also starting to train kids to understand how you do water quality monitoring. We have the equipment to do that, and it's going to be again, it's a startup. So this would be the first time we've had permanent water out there since the land's been there. So this is going to be a change and an interesting sort of progress of what happens within that system. People have asked, are we going to stock it with fish? Well, we probably won't. The only issue, of course, is mosquitoes. And we're going to try to avoid putting in non-native mosquito fish. There are some native fish that we're working with Peter Moyle at campus, who's recommended some different species. So we're looking at some alternatives to that. And I mentioned before, the Rotary groups have come together. They already put the money together for design. And they've been spending their effort primarily in the last year on areas on people that needed because of COVID, which is very understandable. So it may not be another year before we get started with the final project and actually building the pavilion out there. But it's online. And last year, before COVID hit, we were doing presentations to all the Rotary clubs around. And they're pretty excited about having a project out there. And that pavilion would be a great place. If you remember where we were positioning it near the corner of the wetland for a gathering area for groups to come in to do art projects, gather for docent guided tours and that sort of thing. So it's going to be pretty nice. That's the view that they will have from that Rotary pavilion out there at the corner. And the long term is to put in a science, culture, nature center. And this is just the concept of that, located in a 2.5 acre footprint. The building itself would be right next to the wetland area and overhanging to some extent. It would have wet labs for students to do things in, some open space for outdoor things, gathering space for events. And most importantly, it would be really a spot for nonprofits to have administrative space on a continuing basis. So the idea is that it's really a collaborative kind of a center where things would go on. And you'll see this concept of parking out of planting here would be primarily native species. This is the stream that runs from the well. The wells have been here and will continue along this way. And that's where it will continue into the ponded area and keep it filled. Eventually, this would be some parking. Initially, we'll be parking in a different spot temporarily, but we're probably a good 3 to 5 years off from this. This is a major fundraising proposition. We are looking at a grant right now that's due to be submitted in November. You never know when you have a big grant like that, what you're going to do, but we're working pretty hard on that, and we might get fortunate and get that started. But that's the ultimate goal, to have this out there, and so that we can really make the most use of this really interesting parkland area and nature reserve. Really, that's what it is. And that's the concept. You'd look at the building from the other side to get some idea of what the scale is like. So what to do at the park? Well, let's hope we open up in the fall. And if we do, there's lots of things to do out there. There will be guided nature and science field trips. As I mentioned before, citizen science projects, collecting data on the changes in the park. So many things to look at. It's really starting, it's not really starting from scratch, but it is for our interaction with it and some of the changes that have gone on. There's lots of opportunity for volunteering, for planting, stewardship. We'll be doing another session of docent training coming up. So lots of things to do. There's a lot of work to be done out there still. And it's a good place to just look, listen, and relax. And I put the shot of the moon up there because one of the things that we'd like to do is do stargazing out there. And actually, Tuleyome did it the year before we had the COVID thing. And so this is another opportunity for use of the park, because when you're out there at night, you're quite a ways away from most of the ambient lights. It's pretty good. And of course, photography, art, meditation, lots of things to do there. One more time lapse. This is sunrise. If you're looking east, of course, where the sun's coming up, across the wetlands. I'll see if I can start this and hopefully it'll work. If you look carefully, right at the end, there's some waterfowl that come in. Here are the ducks. So to remind you, we have many supporters, collaborators, and partners with the park. This is most of them here, but each one of those represents people, several people, and so you start adding it all up, and there's lots. And I did want to mention a few that are really been key to this. With the Yellow Audubon, Allison Kent has been really involved with this way back and helping to do sign design, along with Susan Shelton, who is going to be doing some ceramics related to the signage. And I don't really want to give away all of that because there's some really cool things happening. There'll be surprises. Roberta Childress has been involved with that group as well, and Don Palm. And Don Palm is with Community College. With Rotary, it's Larry Green, and I think Brad Miller might even be online, zooming on tonight. Both Larry and Brad have been instrumental in getting encouraging the Rotaries to get involved with this. It's been great. And of course, the Woodland City Council, Ken Hyde's been great to work with and all the staff there to make this thing happen. And it really is a community and collaborative project. And I think it's one of those things where it isn't just going to be Davis or Woodland, or it's a regional project. And I think everyone's going to enjoy this as the years go by. So thanks for your attention. I hope there's some time for questions, and there's some contacts there. If you go onto the tuleyome.org website, you'll see some more information about it. And I think that's where you'll find I think it's April 10th, perhaps, with the wildlife Zoom field trip at the park. So thanks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, there's some questions in there.
I'm going to close this out then.
When you go to the Tuleyome website, there go to the events drop down, and you'll see the things that are out there, and you'll be able to log into the and register for the April 10th online tour out at the regional park. Jennifer sent us a note reminding us that the Sierra Club provided some funding for
oh yes
for the kiosk, so she wanted to make sure we mentioned that. And I also wanted to throw in before we start with the questions, we have a couple of game cameras out there, which have taken some really fun shots, and we've shared that. Probably the best place to see them is to go into our Facebook page and look over through the Facebook pictures. But occasionally we post interesting Facebook shots, and we've got some good ones at night with barn owls and coyotes and stuff like that. It's pretty exciting out there.
Yeah, and I think we're due to get some more out there, as I understand more. Yeah.
Okay, so questions. There are a few questions about the landfill.
Okay.
Back there. Have there been any methane venting issues from the former landfill?
That's a really good question. So, and just to backtrack a bit, when the landfill was capped, they require monitoring of gases and water quality as well. And so, and they still do monitoring, and they do inspections on the cap itself every quarter. And so to answer the question, no, we have not seen that. And they have in the past, especially when it's been only open for 10 or 15 or closed for 10 or 15 years, they do a lot of monitoring with that. But no, no evidence of that. And I think that's one of those things that when we're looking at the construction of a building out there, there'll probably be some more inspections of soils and so on before that would occur.
Now the next question is basically the same thing, and ask if there's any toxic gas leakage from the dump.
Yeah.
So there's monitoring.
Yep.
Let's see, next question. Oh, about the test well, the test bore.
Yes.
What kind of information was learned from that test bore, and how deep was the groundwater source determined to be?
I think, well, what they do is they go down and pull out cores and check for what that substrate is, but also where the water table is. I think it's down about 140 feet, as I recall where it was, because I went out there once and they had all the test bores samples set out, and they were checking for consistency, the content, moisture, and all that. And I think they're about 140 feet, and they're just looking, and they've got plenty of capacity, I think, for the irrigation, but also capacity to keep that 12 or so acre pond up where it needs to be. What we're waiting on now, though, is the power connection to the pump out there.
Okay, a question from Carla. Does the use of well water increase the alkalinity of the soil in the pond area?
No, I don't think it will increase it. It may decrease it a bit. I mean, the alkalinity is coming from the soil and the evaporation that goes, the cycling of evaporation going on every summer. I don't think it'll change it that much. One of the things that we'll be looking at, though, and that's why we're looking at the water quality monitoring, is pH, alkalinity, dissolved oxygen, temperature changes. I did put out some, and I forgot to put this on tonight, I did put out some recording temperature loggers when we had water out there 3 years ago. They were recording temperature every hour, and it's pretty interesting. We got up to pretty high temperatures around June and July. And I mean, when I say high, we're up in 28 to 32 degrees C, which is getting pretty warm. But everything was drying up then too, pretty rapidly. So it'll be interesting. We will be monitoring temperature as well as the other water quality variables once we get that pond up full time.
Okay, next question from Barbara. Has the Yocha-Dihi Winton Nation been involved in the planning of the plantings for this area?
We had some discussions with them, and they certainly will be getting involved with this. Some of the representatives from the tribe have been out there. They were out there a year ago, I guess it was. We walked around, and they had some great ideas for planting for example, for plants that would be used for food, for basket weaving, those kinds of things. Yeah, so they're going to be involved with that, and there's actually several areas that can be set aside for so I would say ethnobotany, those kinds of plantings to be done.
Okay, here's an interesting one from Kirk. Have insect diversity surveys been done in this area, or will they be planned? And bats, and he's suggesting a wildlife acoustics program, grant program for bats.
That sounds really interesting, and insects are really. To answer the question, no, I don't think anyone's looked at insects yet. I mean, I've seen certainly the solitary bees pollinating the Lithenia out there. I've seen those, but no, I don't think so. But we have had discussions about bat boxes for sure, and Corky. Corky is interested in coming out there with some bat boxes. So yeah, that, in fact, if whoever that is, if they'd like to contact us and got some ideas for projects, that would be great.
Yeah, and he posted a link that I saved
Okay.
to this acoustics monitoring program, grant program.
Yeah.
How can one sign up to volunteer opportunities at the Woodland Regional Park? Oh, that was directly to me, but give it to everybody. I'm sure everyone wants to know.
Well, you could go to either Jennifer's online. She can do it. Jennifer's email or mine. It's I think that those are on the Tuleyome website, and they were on that slide I put up there. I don't know if it's gone now. It's gone, but yeah, I would just contact Tuleyome or contact Bill.
Sure. You can. I believe it's Carla that sent it, but anyway, you can send me a note, and I will pass your information on to the right people.
Yeah, we're really interested in, and there's so many, as I said before, there's so many projects that are waiting to happen out there, and ideas and things we probably haven't even thought of. So we're really encouraged to have people contact us and get involved. We have certain things to get done for the grants we're doing, but we need to be planning ahead, of course.
Okay, what other mammals or herps do you have out there, including beavers, otters, mink, muskrat? Will there be any effort to keep out bullfrogs?
That's a good question. Well, if it's up to me, there'll be an effort. My whole background is in invasive species, so I don't want them there. We do have coyotes out there, probably foxes. I haven't seen foxes. There's lots of ground squirrels. I'm sure there's plenty of things to see, and I'm not sure on those cameras whether you've seen anything other than foxes at this point. I don't remember.
Rabbits, coyotes. I can say that it's very, very close, Willow Slough, over at the Conway Ranch area, and over there's all sorts of stuff. So there's raccoons, and there's otters, there's mink.
Well, I've seen raccoon tracks for sure.
So all that stuff, once there's permanent water, I'm sure all that stuff will be moving where there's water.
Yeah, and I've seen certainly raccoon tracks out there frequently. You see it in the mud, and they're out there.
Yeah, western pond turtles, it wouldn't take much for them to walk over.
Well, we don't want any red sliders, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things we've talked about is having in the kiosk, we're going to have general information and a whole timeline, which is going to be interesting, that Susan Shelton's working on, and Allison and the whole group, the sign group. But I think the other thing we really want to do is emphasize for people not to bring their things there and just toss them in there, which has happened in so many places, whether it's goldfish or anything. It really want to discourage people from, it's no longer a dump. Let's put it that way. For
subject to bullfrogs, there definitely are bullfrogs over at Willow Slough, so it wouldn't take much for the bullfrogs to hop over.
You're right, and we'll have to watch for that. Absolutely, yeah.
Are you hoping for burrowing owls to take up residence?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and there are a lot of holes out there in the hills. I know that. That's a funny thing about those caps, because we do have coyotes that dig in, the rabbits dig in those caps, and as I said before, they're inspected quarterly, and they fill up holes when they find them. But I don't know. It's I haven't seen any out there yet, but it doesn't mean they won't appear.
Has there been a baseline survey of what species of animals and plants are on the land now?
The plants
that are monitoring planned.
Yeah, the 2009 survey was very good. Terry Berry, who's with the herbarium, is in the middle of starting another survey, a much more broader area of the park, of the land. So we'll have a pretty good, I think, very good handle on the plants. The animals, can't say that. I'm not aware of anyone who's got a project started yet to do a real thorough survey of animals on the park. The only thing we see now is what we see. We see scat tracks and what we see when we're out there and what the cameras pick up. And that's about it for now.
Okay, that's the last question that's posted now. Anybody have any other questions? Last chance. Well, while people are thinking, I'll just mention next month's speaker So next month we have our next lecture, and the topic is, again, some urban wildlife. This is even more urban. This is going to be talking about some wildlife that's moved into the San Francisco Presidio. So there's going to be a biologist that's been studying all the wildlife at the San Francisco Presidio, and that will be the speaker on April 22nd. So please sign up for that.
That's Earth Day.
And oh, that's Earth Day. Wonderful. Okay. And again, I want to encourage everybody to go to tuleyome.org website. You can look at everything we do and sign up for events with the events drop down. Okay, here's another question. Oh, when will you know if the caps can be accessed, or when the caps can be accessed?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a discussion with Ken a few days ago about this, Ken Hyatt, and it's interesting. There are sites like this where they have allowed use of the caps or just access to them. I think it's going to take a little bit of discussion about how that trail would work up there if we had to add material to it to protect the cap, for example. And then how do you keep people on the trail and not off the trail if you have a trail up there, and those are some of the questions. And then it would certainly require monitoring as well. So we have a ways to go with that. I mean, I'm optimistic that we will be able to use it at some point, but I don't know when at this point.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions. Oh, here we go. Here's another question. It says, will there be an acknowledgement that the park is on Winton homeland?
Yes.
Land management practices such as cultural burning be integrated into the vision of the park? And is this the only place for only a place for Western science?
No, that's a really good question. Addressing the burning part, that's interesting. We had just discussed this a few days ago, actually, again. And, I've been involved with the Jepson Prairie docents for quite a while. And I was involved with an attempt to start a burn down there to burn off the non-native grasses. That's partly why you do that. And it was difficult. You have to find the right window, which means the right moisture, the right time, the wind's got to be zero practically. And so that part of it's pretty difficult to maintain, but the idea of it and the incorporating the Winton culture, yes, definitely. We were actually talking about getting tribal people more involved with the content of signs that we're putting up and spaces. One of the things that's good about this kiosk, and the kiosk is up, is that it's going to be a focal point where people will presumably go to just get oriented to the park, and we'll have information like that there as well. But yeah, and in fact, it would be nice if we could do some burns out there and follow those practices, because they do work. The problem we have too also is right across the street is Spring Lake houses. And so it's a little dicey to do burns.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I guess that's it.
Thanks very much for your attention, everybody out there, and appreciate it. And please do go online to Tuleyome and check out what we're doing. And for volunteering at the park, there's plenty to do. Lots to do out there.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, Lars. And see you guys out at the park someday.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.